Hello, welcome to another episode of Mr. Hanson is Absent. So this is our virtual lesson for the day. I wanted to talk with you guys briefly about your reading on issue and conclusions. Um, you know, uh, this might seem like a simplistic thing to start off with, but there's so many times that people miss this, and if you don't understand what the issue is that a person is responding to or what their conclusion is, there's so many times that people make a bad response. So I'll talk a little bit about more how that might look and examples of where this happens. So um, let's just start with an open question here, or an example. Cell phones are becoming a large part of today's society, bringing with them benefits and drawbacks. They are beneficial for those with tight schedules and in case of emergencies. Cell phones can also come in handy for parents to check up on their children. Even though cell phones do carry benefits, the drawbacks are in their inappropriate use. When a cell phone rings or owners talk on them during a lecture or a concert, a major disruption in the concentration of others is inevitable. Even though there are suggestions in polite society to leave them off, perhaps we need stronger penalties associated with abuse of the growing popularity of cell phones. Obviously, this is an older, maybe somewhat obsolete argument, but still, there's things in there that are important. So, what is the issue and what is the conclusion? Hopefully, you guys remember from your reading that an issue is a question. Okay, so what is the question that this person is responding to? And in this case, you might need to do some backwards looking. Okay. And then what is the conclusion? And in this case, if the issue is the question, the conclusion is the answer. Okay. So if you have read through this, you will see that the question the person is responding to is not listed, but it's more or less along the lines of, are cell phones, does there need to be a consequence for misuse of cell phones? And their conclusion is more or less yes. Okay, so hopefully you're able to spot that. Okay, so again, an issue is a question. It's not going to be a statement. It has to be a question. So when people say, what is your issue? They're not really using it correctly. Again, the issue means a question that you're responding to. The conclusion, then again, is the message the speaker wishes to convey that you would accept it, or an answer to their question. Okay. Okay. So, sorry, my computer's being a little slow here. Types of issues that you might encounter. We have what are called descriptive issues, which are more or less raising questions about the definition of something, or this could be something of how we understand the past, present, or future. And then prescriptive issues are going to be things that are, told for us to do or to think. So for instance, okay, so let me talk about descriptive issues. Do families who own pets have fewer arguments with one another? That's not telling us that we need to go buy a pet. It's just changing our understanding. What causes high blood pressure? Okay, this is not saying you need to go buy high blood pressure medicine, although maybe inadvertently it does. But on the surface, it's let's change our understanding of this. Who made the decision to increase our tuition? Okay, that is a question of, do we get mad at the dean, even though we might? But it's just a clarification. How much will college cost in the year 2020? Oh man, this is old. How much will college cost in the year 2030? How about that? Or maybe more pertinent to you guys, maybe 2023. Okay. That becomes all of a sudden more significant for us. But again, that's not telling you to go to college or, just go get a job somewhere else. It's just asking a question for us to make a better understanding. Prescriptive issues, Should capital punishment be abolished? This is now asking us to take a position to do something, okay, whether or not you do or not. What ought to be done about Social Security? Okay, that's another thing that requires some sort of action, okay, whether it be from us or other government parties. Must we outlaw SUVs or face increasing rates of asthma? Okay, that's another thing that's requiring us to make an action. Sorry guys, I'm going to just have to do it this way. Okay, so one of the things that you need to think about is where you can find an issue or where the question will be. And oftentimes, if you look in these strategic spots, you should be able to find it pretty easily. And sometimes I even put the question. So if you look at the title, oftentimes titles are listed as a question. Okay, what to do about the Ukraine and Russia problem? All right, that would be an issue, and then you would expect the rest of the paper to highlight what leads up to their conclusion. An author may just say it explicitly. Okay, the question that I'm about to respond to, that might be in the introduction. Okay, it could be when the body of the text, and again, usually just right at the beginning. So examples that you might see of this, the question I'm raising is, why must we have laws requiring seatbelts in cars? Lowering the legal drinking age, is it the right thing to do? Should sex education be taught in schools? Okay, those are all things that you might see just listed in layman's terms that way. Now, more times than not, I would say your issue is not going to be explicitly stated, so you're going to have to think backwards. Okay, so like that first example I gave you, you got to ask your question, what is the author reacting to? So in that one, I could see they're reacting to inappropriate use of cell phones. They talked about cell phones in general on the basis, but their big thing was what should be done about cell phones when they're misused. Okay, so an example, if you read an essay about school shootings, okay, what is it specifically the author is reacting to? And that way, if you work backwards, you can find what the question is, because you can oftentimes know from the answer. Sometimes you can look at what the author's background is. If we read something from like Ted Nugent, for instance, and he's writing about guns or gun control, we can probably guess from his, background. I don't know, I keep using gun control, but it's just easy, that he's probably opposed to gun control in most instances. And then just another easy thing is locate the conclusion. If you can find the answer, then you can work backwards to come up with a question. But keep in mind, guys, if you don't know what the issue is, you can't make a fair reaction to it. When we think about conclusions, guys, if a person says, well, just to make sure we're not mistaking this, a claim is not the same thing as a conclusion. So if I say cats should all be drowned, I don't really give a basis for that. This kind of ties back into our reasons. I mean, you could call that maybe a claim from a certain perspective, but you have to have a rationale. I could say that, and some of you might be like, oh no, we can't do that. I love cats. But if I say cats should all be drowned because they often carry diseases harmful to humans, some of you would still say that's ridiculous, but that gives at least a little merit to it. If I said all cats are carrying a disease that will wipe out, all of humanity in the next 3 years, some of you might be more in favor of that. Okay, that kind of goes in our value complexes. But that one is more of a conclusion than just the claim. Okay. And again, just like issues, some conclusions are not stated explicitly. There's reasons for that. Sometimes an author has a controversial issue and they don't want to state it explicitly, but those who really look closely can probably draw out what they're trying to say. But this is another thing. If you don't know the issue, you can't make a fair reaction. If you don't know an author is what their conclusion is, you're going to make an unfair reaction. So I'll give 2 examples. So I one time was taking a class, and our teacher passed out a essay to us about respecting women. And the secretary that she had make the copies of it read some of it, but she only like read in the middle. And she got back to the teacher and was just said, I think that this is drivel. You shouldn't be having students read this. Like, I'm very offended that you would be assigning this. And what she was looking at was the author was citing stereotypes against women and education. And, some of the things that people believed about women when this piece was written, I think in the late 1800s, was pretty horrible. But he was listing as, look at all these reasons. And then he got to his conclusion that we need to put these aside because women are great. The secretary only didn't know what the issue was, and she did not know what the conclusion was. And so she made a reaction with only partial knowledge, and she was reacting incorrectly. Okay, that might seem like a obscure case. Let me give you another one. This happens in politics all the time. I remember once when I was scrolling through Facebook years ago, and when Obama was president, I've also, in this example, I've also learned that I have a lot of conservative mom friends. I guess I'm in that age bracket. Anyways, I just kept seeing all these people saying, Dear Mr. Obama, I love being a mom, or Mr. Obama, you have no right to say being a mom is a bad thing, or stuff like that. And so I was intrigued. I said, what did Obama say that would elicit all these responses from women that I'm friends with? So I went and actually watched the speech that he gave. It was a presidential address. It was like 40 minutes long, and I was stalwart and I watched the whole thing. And I got to the part that people were reacting to. And, granted, Obama, what he was saying about women was not said very elegantly. But what he was ultimately saying that I could draw from his speech was, people were seeing his argument as saying women, stay-at-home moms should go out and work and put their kids in daycare. And that's what they were reacting to. But he wasn't saying that women should do this. He was saying we need these women's talents, and we need to provide means for them to go out and work if they so desire, because we need them. So he was talking about, getting daycares and other things, funding to help take work for childcare. So that's a very different thing than saying we need to do this because motherhood is bad versus we need your talents and we want to provide you opportunities that you can work if you want to. That's a very different thing. So all these people were reacting incorrectly. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians and people who are opposed to different politicians will do this all the time. They'll take little bits and pieces. Any public figure that they can deface, they'll make stuff up. And they'll give you a partial truth. And so they say, so-and-so said this, and it's taken out of context. So I would encourage you guys, if you see, and this again happens all the time, if you come across something like that and it's a big concern to you, go and look at the source and see what the person actually said. Okay. And that will make a significant difference in how you react, and you won't be reacting incorrectly. And I think a lot of us make snap judgments because we don't know the issue and we don't know the conclusion. Okay. Okay. So how do you discover the conclusion if it's not written explicitly? Ask what the issue is. And if you understand what the question they're responding to, you can usually find what their conclusion is. Unless it's like we're kind of parting both sides and I just want to present both sides of the issue. But that's not really an argument. That's just a report. Look for indicator words. If they say consequently, therefore, it follows that or shows that the point is, the truth of the matter is. We talked about this with meta discourse, but this can all be a signal that, I'm coming to a conclusion. Some of those might be tied to reasons, but yeah, you get the idea. Look in the likely low places or likely locations. A lot of times they'll say their argument right in the thesis statement, and which is a good idea. I think is good writing. If you know what their conclusion is at the get-go, you can see the rationale for that thinking instead of trying to figure out what are they talking about. Although oftentimes they'll put it at the end, so that's where a conclusion is, and sometimes they'll just restate it, so look in the beginning or the end, and you'll most likely find the answer. You also want to remember that conclusions are not examples. They're not statistics, they're not definitions, they're not background information, it's not evidence in general. Okay, so some people make that mistake. Okay, it's like, well, so-and-so put this as evidence, so this must be their conclusion, and that's not what it is. It's support for that conclusion. You might check the context of the communication or author's background. What is it that they're responding to? You know, anytime that something big politically happens, people come and they make these statements. I think, you know, with issues of COVID, there's a lot of reactions that people make. If something big happens in our community, people make reaction to that. And that oftentimes can help you find conclusions of what people are looking for. This can also be helpful if you look at an author's background. Sometimes that can help you see their bias. If you're looking at like a news network, you can see different biases that come from that. If a person's associated with a group, so okay, the NRA again, or MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, ask questions like, okay, and therefore, what are you saying? If they're writing a conclusion that has implications, look for the information that communicates that. So an application of your own writing, guys, a few things that I want you to think about. I would say more times than not, it's more important to make your conclusion easily identifiable. You know, when you get to paper 3, if you're going to be making an argument, I want it to be clear from the get-go, you know, what you're arguing. You know, as a writer, you don't want your readers to guess your thoughts necessarily. You want them to be clear at the, you know, right out the gate. And it might more or less improve your logic if you're just kind of weaving through and you're like, well, I guess I kind of came to this conclusion. And a lot of times this takes a lot of forethought, and you can go back and fix if, you know, after your evidence, you're like, you know what, I really don't think that this is accurate. Then you can change your conclusion, but, you know, let people know at the beginning. Okay. And then just make sure your issue and conclusion correlate. I can't tell you how many student papers I've read where they don't. So here's an example. Will owning a pet increase how long we live? So that might be their issue that they're addressing. And the conclusion is pets bring joy to the lives of everyone who owns them because they are calming. Now, when they're side by side like that, we can obviously see that that conclusion is not answering the issue. But when you have a whole paper in between that, sometimes we get lost in translation. Okay, so if right at the beginning, if you know after all your writing, like if I can identify my issue and I know what my answer is, my conclusion, put them side by side and see if they match. And if they don't, then that's a sign to revise. Okay, so a better conclusion for this is yes, it will increase our lifespan by an average of, I don't have it on here, but like 8 years. Okay. So before you can evaluate, just as a reminder, an author's argument, you must clearly identify the issue and their conclusion. And again, this makes logical sense. How can you evaluate an argument if you don't know exactly what the author's trying to persuade you to believe? If you read an argument and you have no idea what the arguments they're trying to make is, that might not be your fault. That could be just a poor communication on their part, and they might use like glittering generalities to try to pump up an audience without really saying what their point is. You know, one issue that I've found difficult recently is like critical race theory. I don't know how much you guys know about that, but I've never found like a clear, definitive definition. And so I see like a lot of politicians talk about this, but I don't get the sense that they really have a clear definition either. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but without having that clear issue of what this is and what the solution to it is, it can be all over the place. And I think we see that happen in politics and other demographics all the time, that Okay, what is my issue and what am I responding to? We get hyped up by an idea and it just, we get lost in translation. So anyways, that is all I have for you guys. If, as usual, you have questions, please let me know. Okay, thanks, guys.